Here's the story of my first time trip sitting. Chapter 1. James. I have a client, and for anonymity reasons, we'll call them James. Now, James has a very serious profession, but also holds a fascinating interest in the spiritual, the holistic, and the mystical. I myself share these interests, and the first time we met, we instantly bonded, talking and discussing about spiritual revolutionists like Ram Dass and Terence McKenna. James later shared with me, months later, that actually at this first meeting, he knew one day I would trip sit him, completely unbeknownst to me, because when he did ask me, fear struck. Because you see, I'd never done this before. What if something happened? What if this happened? What if that happened? But I very soon came to realize that maybe I should surrender to this. And I very quickly said yes. You see, James had already trusted me with his own personal stories of his own personal adventures with psilocybin. And we also discussed how it's still very taboo in society and how most of the research was shut down in the late 60s, early 70s. But interestingly now, the floodgates are opening back up again to this research, even with mainstream figures like Jordan Peterson talking about psilocybin's benefits on depression, anxiety, and even addictions. And crazy enough, as of today, over 25 countries have decriminalized certain drugs to some degree, and even some states in America are along for the ride. Chapter 2. Research. My own personal experience with mushrooms was limited. I had taken a few in my early 20s in Bali to not much effect, and more recently I took a larger dose, around 2 grams of these foul-tasting mushrooms on a ferry to the longest or broadest beaches in the Netherlands, a place I can't even pronounce. This was considered a half dose, and the effects were slight, but they were wonderful. Colours were more vibrant, anxieties were alleviated. I could have literally sat and meditated for hours. But I was with friends, so I'm still yet to experience psilocybin in a therapeutic setting. So I reached out to a good friend of mine who has a repertoire of experience with hallucinogenics, both for healing purposes and also recreationally. So some key points I came away with were to be in a clean, familiar environment, preferably close to nature. If there was no chance of interference or interruption, to have sugary foods and vitamin C packed fruits and juices on hand, just in case the person didn't want to continue with their trip anymore. This can help bring them down. A very important factor is to check physical and psychological contraindications before the trip, but my favorite one is to check with them their intention for their adventure. An intention could be something they intend to learn, or what do they want to achieve from their journey inward. And an excellent point for me was to stay calm no matter what, to remain present, but not to interfere. Chapter 3. Trip day. The scene was set. I turned up slightly nervous, but ultimately open-minded and ready to learn. Together, me and James prepared the area. We made sure it was clean, it was safe, and that all precautions were in place to keep James at ease. I had bought sandwiches and the vitamin C packed goodies, just in case. The control was then handed over to me, and me and James sat down together in the space he would ultimately lay down, blindfolded, to travel inwards. Ambient music played by this wonderful playlist the Essence Institute in the Netherlands specifically curated for tripping. The dosage was then respectfully taken, and me and James sat and we talked about family, we talked about the intentions, and we also ran through a short breath work just to unlock the parasympathetic nervous system and to initiate a rest and digest response. When James gave me the all clear that he was ready to travel inward, I moved out of his space, I handed him his blindfold, and I sat by quietly reading a book called I Am That by Sri Nisargadatta Maharaj. I'm not sure I said that correctly, but the teachings from this book actually played a huge role in our whole journey. Before the psychoactive effects begin, nausea is commonly experienced, but James knew this and he was fully prepared for it. He quickly breathed and surrendered to it all, and he even had given me some affirmations to read him just to help him get through this stage. And as we both expected, the nausea passed, and then the effects took an incredible turn. After some time, I had left James's side to meditate quietly in the corner, present but uninterrupting, which later James shared with me that this brought him comfort and helped him to go deeper. And as the body functions, it was time for some water and a trip to the bathroom. But as James lifted the blindfold, his eyes lit up in amazement. It was like he was seeing everything for the first time. After this, the blindfold was actually never put back on. There was too much to explore. I watched James as he studied his hands, surroundings. He even studied my face. He stared at me, and as I looked back at him, he told me that my face was changing from every man to every woman to old to young to every person who ever will be to every person who ever was. This was just one of the many profound things James shared with me that day. Every time he would say something, I would pretty much write it down, and by the end of the day I had so many notes and so many profound quotes. Too many to share, but there were a couple that he repeated throughout the trip that always stand out to me and I'll always remember. One of them was he would find these moments of complete union, and he would always say, "I understand now, all is one." For James, these seemed like moments of complete clarity, and he would always rejoice in these moments. He would be laughing or crying hysterically. For me, I always see these two actions, laughing and crying, as so synonymous. There seem to be such powerful releases. By this point, James had really been through it all. While he was off journeying, I would be reading the book I Am That, and I'd find quotes and underline them. And every now and then he would ask me to hear one. Now these are super deep spiritual quotes that I can't even grasp fully. But it's almost like he could sense it with every part of his body, and he just thoroughly and wholly understood. Chapter 4. Pain. James shared with me a painful feeling he experienced. It was a pain that he'd been recurring his whole life, but it seemed like he was now ready to deal with it. He laid back down and created darkness by pulling the blankets over his eyes. And what's interesting was he started to call on the pain. He was like, come here. He was in no way fighting the pain. He was almost surrendering. The pain then took over his entire body, and I could literally hear how much it was hurting him. He later told me after he surrendered to the pain and he started to welcome it, it literally took over his entire body until it just shot out of the top of his head. Chapter 5. Coming Down. James had set his eyes on the outside world and he wanted to experience it. We moved into the garden. He took off his socks to ground into the earth, and he just started rolling around on the ground. And he just spent some time laughing hysterically and rolling in the grass. He later explained to me what he could see in the nearby plants. He could see them vibrating and how they were growing, and also how they were feeding their offspring. And at one point he just grabbed my leg to check out my tattoos, and he'd sit and explain what everything in that moment meant to him. Of course, everything he saw was very deeply personal. What was very powerful for me to see in that moment was a man grab and use his strength and power almost primitively in a world where it seems at the moment very taboo to be so mighty. It's almost as though our society is afraid of its own strength. Some more time passed before we actually ate something. So we had a couple of sandwiches, but we were discussing and laughing as James was telling me how useless any of the vitamin C packed goodies would have been bringing him down. That was not going to bring him down from where he was. And we finished off the session by reading through some of the notes and some of the quotes and some of the profound things that James shared that day. Just sharing anything that wanted to be shared. And I know we were both genuinely grateful for our new wisdom, because I know I had learned so much by just observing. 2 weeks later, me and James, we met up and we had an integrations meeting where we discussed the essence of the adventure and how we both took a lot from it. And we're both hoping this movement finds its way back into the medical and the therapeutic industries. Disclaimer alert, I'm in no way recommending this for every person, unless perhaps under medical supervision or the overlook of a professional, perhaps even a retreat. What I am promoting is the discussion around natural medicines and the normalization of usage within the medical industry. Should this be allowed? I'd love to hear your comments, hear your thoughts. Should this be a movement brought back into the mainstream, or should it be cut down again? Let me know. Thank you for watching, thank you for listening, and I'll see you again.